Well, hey guys, it's Dr. Drake 63 here today. Today we're going to talk about a couple of the iconic long-serving pistols that were developed by John Browning. We're going to talk about the 1911, which here's a brand new Colt Series 70 Government 2020 sitting here on your right. Here's about a 20-year-old Series 80 sitting on the left. So there's some differences in terms of drop safety, how far is the trigger protruding, things that we've talked about in past videos. These, of course, both shoot 45 ACP. And we're going to talk about Browning's final masterpiece, which is the Browning High Power. On the right, you see a C version from 1976. This is pretty much your basic post-war Browning High Power. And on your left, this particular one is also Belgian-made. It is from 1996, and that's of the Mark III series, with some small differences. And if you look real close, if you've been watching my videos recently, this one has a new set of stocks on it. And these are Hogue Pow Faroes. I think they're beautiful. They fit nice and sleek, very slim. I love the wood texturing on that. But anyway, what I'm going to do today is talk about the differences between the 1911 and the Browning High Power. I'm going to take apart the two on the right and point those differences out. Talk a little bit about John Browning's involvement in both. Pretty much the 1911 is all his baby, with the help of course, some engineers and other folks who probably will never know their name. And we'll talk about the high power that Browning never saw in completion, but he had the innovation of the tilt barrel. And the reason that innovation was made was because there was a patent on this guy right here with Colt. He couldn't mess with it. So we'll talk about some of those changes, why they ended up being improvements in a lot of guys' minds. But in a world where people are Glock versus 1911, SIG versus Glock, Wilson Combat, who makes the best what? We're going to talk about two guns that John Browning had some degree of influence on. Both basically bear his trademark, his name. And there's people that are going to argue about the differences in these and which one's better. All you have to do is spend a little bit of time on the internet, and you'll see people getting in big arguments over that. So obviously these guys on top are 9mm. They also did make a 40 Smith & Wesson version. Obviously many different calibers available in the 1911, 9mm being one of them. And in addition to that, you see 10mm, you see 45 ACP, you name it. So you've got some differences, but I just want to talk about these and how they're different and why I think they're both great platforms, great guns, often copied. And this one on top is pretty much the granddaddy of the modern 9mm, including the polymers. Fire control systems differ, but the basic tilt barrel design, as we're going to see, really does not. Stay tuned. So the first thing I want to say is I'm a huge 1911 fan, and I have been for a long time. In my opinion, no firearm fits better in the hand for pointing and shooting. It's a beautiful masterpiece because it is a single stack design. It tends to have that nice slim profile and the slim grip, and this makes the ultimate sidearm in a lot of ways. However, one of the ways it doesn't make the ultimate personal firearm for self-defense, for military duty or whatever, is the fact that this only holds 7 rounds. You can put an 8-rounder in it, plus one in the pipe, so to speak. So you do have that issue. We're going to take this apart in a minute. I want you to see that it has been checked. Having always felt that the 1911 was the ultimate fit-in-hand firearm, I tried a Browning High Power after hearing about them for years from guys that raved about them. And here you go. And this is a firearm that actually, in my hand, even fits a little bit better from an ergonomic point and shoot standpoint than the 1911, which seems kind of hard to believe. This one is from 1976. It's an all Belgian production, Belgian made, Belgian assembled, and these were brought into the country by the Browning Company. So this one also is been checked. This happens to have a double stack magazine, which will hold either 13 or 15 rounds of 9mm plus one in the pipe. So that's a big advantage. I personally like that. I'm not going to get in a big philosophical discussion today about which round's better, 45 or 9. Both of these firearms were designed to shoot ball ammo. And to that extent, yeah, the 45 is going to poke a bigger hole. This whole stopping power myth is just that, guys. If it hits you in the shoulder, it's going to stop you no more with a 9mm or a 45 or vice versa. It's all about shot placement. So I'm not one that's going to buy into this whole, you got to have 45 or it won't get the job done. Personally, I'm a guy that believes when the chips are down, more ammo equals better. And the 9, especially modern loadings, are most definitely adequate for that job. So with that said, why don't we take these apart and let's look at the differences between those designs, compare them to a couple modern designs. I mentioned I was going to compare these two to a couple modern designs. What you have here is the Smith & Wesson 6906. This is a third generation 9mm Smith & Wesson. They kind of came out of the model 59, and we're going to take this apart and compare it. And as well, we're going to look at this Glock 19, which you've seen a lot in for as kind of a benchmark and comparison in my videos. And we're going to look at how those designs pretty much all were born of this, with basically some different fire control groups. And then we're going to talk about this guy to start, the 1911. What's different about this more than anything, you'll notice it's got the safety right here on the back of the grip safety. This has to be depressed in order to fire the weapon. Otherwise, it's not going to work. This particular firearm will shoot without a magazine. It does not have a magazine disconnect, like you will see later with the Browning High Power. There's a magazine disconnect in the Smith & Wesson 6906. There is not a magazine disconnect in this Glock 19. Those are minor differences that were incorporated for various reasons. But this 1911, obviously designed in 1911, this is a Series 70, some minor differences from the originals, but we're going to look at the parts, and we're going to compare them to the parts we see here and talk about that. Now, I mentioned that this 1911 can be shot without the magazine in place. There you go. Whereas this high power right here, if you take the magazine out, it's not going to shoot. Now, the one I showed you on the table earlier, that's been modified so the magazine disconnect has been disabled so that you can fire the weapon even without a magazine in it. But you can't on the original high power design, and certainly not this one from 1976. But let's talk about taking them down. First of all, with the 1911, you've got a number of things that you need to do, which are kind of unique to this firearm, certainly for its time. You need to depress this cap here and turn your barrel bushing, which allows you to relieve tension on that spring. And then it's just a matter, the spring moves, it's just a matter with the barrel bushing. So this simply rotates, and then it can be removed by sliding it out just like that, okay? So you have those two pieces that you need to remove, and then you can move your slide back until such point that you're lined up here with your takedown pin. That comes out, and now you can take the firearm apart. Still a few more pieces to go. The spring comes out as such. And then you've got your barrel, which slides out through the front, just like that. And this has a barrel lug on it. And what that basically does is when you insert this pin through the slide, it holds the barrel in place. So, well, that was a John Browning patent. So that was one of the things that he was not able to do when he left Colt and went to work for FN, was use this particular style to take it down. So he had to invent something different. But you saw what was involved in the taking down of this firearm, and I want to count the parts. Spring, end cap, bushing, that's 3. Takedown pin, 4. Barrel, that's 5. This link is held in by a pin, and this can be taken out, so it's arguable whether you want to call that a 5th and 6th part or not. But you've got 5 distinct parts plus that pin, and then your slide, okay? And there you go. Now, comparing that to the high power, it's a completely different scenario. With the high power, you have here on the back, there is a separate little notch that you use for your safety, and there's one farther up that you use to hold your slide in place. And I'm trying to do this backwards with a greasy slide, but basically there you go. So you hold this open, which allows you then to push up on this pin, and it comes right out. You push from the other side, and it comes right out. Okay. Now it's a matter of releasing the takedown mechanism, and out comes your barrel, or your slide, I should say. Now, this has a spring. It has inside it kind of the same thing that you see here with this locking lug, except this, because of the patent, was designed to slide into this notch right here and performs kind of the same function. But here's your big difference, and this is what makes this style still prevalent today and such a difference from what you saw from the 1911. Instead of having to fool around with end caps, barrel bushings, and things of that nature, you simply pick your barrel up and slide it off. So, what do I have for distinct parts? I'm counting this as 1. Takedown pin is 2. Barrel is 3. So you basically eliminated 2 parts from the takedown process, and both for the speed at which I could take this down, which we didn't use a stopwatch, and certainly in the reassembly process, advantage definitely goes to the high power. There's no question about it. And guys, I know there's going to be somebody that says they can put on a blindfold, they can take down a 1911 way quicker than I did it, and it's really a lot faster if you know what you're doing. But let's be honest, guys. We're talking about average guys like you and me, and this is what's involved in takedown. Easy peasy. So here's the takedown for this 5906 from Smith & Wesson. You need to insert the empty magazine and cycle once. Then all I'm going to do is pull this back until this notch is over this part of the takedown pin. Give it a little bit of help. Out she comes. And there you go. We're talking about same kind of situation that you had with the high power, a spring with a guide rod. In this case, the guide rod is not a barrel link. It just rests against the barrel. And then you take the barrel out, and there you go. So again, we're looking at 1 part, 2 parts, 3 parts, and that's it. 3 parts. Let's look at the Glock next. Now, the easiest out of all these is the Glock, and the reason why is your takedown pin is actually spring-loaded right here. You can see that real well. It's right here in this indentation. So, basically all I'm doing, clearing the chamber, obviously, making sure it's not loaded. I pull the trigger, and then all I need to do is pull my slide back just about that far and pull back on that disconnect, so you don't have that part. See, end up you've got your spring, which in this case, a little bit of technology, a double capture type spring, works the same purpose, and a tilt barrel and a slide. So how many parts are we talking about laying on the table when you take down a Glock? Outside of the frame and outside of the slide? 2. Okay, but Glock didn't really invent anything new. What they did was figure out how to make a spring-loaded takedown pin. That's all they've done. And you can see it right here. That will move back and forth when I push it down, and that's what holds your barrel in place. So a little bit of an innovation, but by far there's not an easier firearm to field strip than a Glock, in my opinion, in terms of a semi-auto loader, and they figured out how to even take a further part out. But tilt barrel design, just like you see with the Browning, the spring tension holds the barrel in place instead of any kind of lug or circle or anything of that nature, and I'm back together. So certainly from an innovation standpoint, Glock definitely takes the cake, but it's directly descendant from that high power. The only thing different is your striker fired. So your fire control group is an internal striker, no external hammer at all, whereas with this Smith & Wesson, it's got a hammer that, if you look at it, only becomes available once you cock it, and then it's got a decocker right here. So you have that capability to not have it get caught on anything. And then this is now a double action, single action. So long first pull of the trigger and the hammer falls, okay? Whereas with the Browning high power, it is a single action only, which means if it's in this state, I can pull this trigger all day long. Nothing's going to happen on that first shot. It needs to be cocked back, either by pulling back and then releasing, or by cocking. And then, very much like the 1911, you've got a safety in the rear that basically blocks the hammer from falling, and it grabs a hold of the slide. So that slide's not going anywhere because of that safety. And then it's just a matter of releasing the safety and pulling the trigger, and there you go. So some different approaches, but all tilt barrel as you move point forward. SIGs are that way. The CZ75 is almost a direct knockoff of the high power with a single action, double action mechanism. Pretty much everybody that's making a 9mm pistol today owes its design to this, the Browning high power. Now, Browning is responsible for the development of the tilt barrel system. However, the fire control group, we pretty much think was carried on by a French designer and the group at FN after Browning died. Like I said, he never saw this completed, but this has John Browning all over it in terms of just the feel in hand, the innovation, obviously the slide, and those kind of things. So I find that very interesting. So this is a pretty brief overview, and guys that are really, really into the history of these things and all the versions and all that, they're going to tell you that I left a lot out about the differences, versions over the years, and that was intentional. I don't want this to be an hour-long video. I'm sure that I've perhaps introduced a few opinions of mine that could be thought of as fighting words. But personally, I think these two firearms are classic examples. I'm very happy with this new Colt, 1911. And even though it's showing some wear and some years, I love the look and the shootability of this Belgian Browning high power. I think these are both great guns. I'm glad to own them both. I would have to tell you, though, if I were pressed, I'd go with this one right here just because of the increased capacity and the fact that modern 9mm ammunition can do quite a bit of effective work on intended targets, and I like to have more of those bullets rather than less with a little bit bigger diameter. But I wouldn't feel bad about taking this one with me anywhere I go. Given a choice, I'd pick this. They're both great designs. John Browning was one hell of a gun designer, guys. There's no question about it. One hell of a gun designer. I want to thank you once again for joining me today. I always enjoy bringing you these kind of comparative videos. We talked a little bit of history. We talked a little bit about differences. Both of these firearms were used for many, many years by many, many armies and police forces throughout the world. This had a service life 1911 into the 80s with the U.S. Army. And a lot of guys still love these to death. This had a service life from the 30s well into the 2000s. The Brits were using these up until the early 2000s. Why? They're dependable firearms. They're very ergonomically friendly, just like the 1911. And the fact that both of these firearms saw so much service with so many forces around the world, that so many people, especially the 1911, have copied this and make these models today, and it's such a popular design. The fact that Browning quit making these, and FN quit making these, they've got them licensed out, you can get copies, so forth and so on, but the fact these are still around in the age of all the Glocks and SIGs and various CZs and things of that nature is a true testament. Often copied, probably never perfected. This is the Browning High Power. This is the 1911 designed by Browning. Awesome firearms. I appreciate you joining me today. I hope to see you again soon. This is Dr. Drake 63 saying so long, guys.